Today we are going to be stepping into the last chapter of Ephesians. We started last week looking at Ephesians chapter 6, and we're going to continue looking at Ephesians chapter 6 as we start to get into this battle that we are in. And the truth is, from childhood through adulthood, we are all faced with the question, who are you? Who are you? From childhood through adulthood, the search and battle for our identity determines our value, our worth, our confidence, our security. And from creation and throughout history of mankind, God has been telling humanity that our value and worth, our identity is through our relationship with Him. And we see that in the beginning of time with Adam and Eve, the very first man and woman. God walked with them daily. God met their needs. Their identity, their security, their value and worth was through their relationship with Him. But then the war began. The deceiver, the devil, he came and he deceived Adam and Eve. He told them, in essence, that they didn't need God, that they couldn't trust God. And the war on identity began. And since that time, the devil has been doing the same thing. He has been trying to take humanity away from their identity in God. He has been deceiving. He has been lying. You see, he is the thief of our identity. And since that time, he has been telling mankind that our identity is in what we do. He's been telling us our identity is in things like a job, our talents, our intelligence, our appearance, the color of our skin, or our relationships. And when we believe those lies, when we buy into a false identity that is separate from God, well, what happens when the athlete gets injured? What happens when the person who their job has been their identity, they can't work anymore, they get too old to be able to do it? What happens when the person who has based their identity in their appearance, their beauty, they start to get older and their appearance changes? What happens when relationships end? What happens when the student who has based their identity in their intelligence, all of a sudden they're not in school anymore? You see, all those false identities, they are an empty. They are a trap that takes us away from God and eventually leave us feeling empty when those things end, whether it is age, whether it is time, whether it is job loss, injury, pandemic, whatever it is, steals or alters those false identities. And then our value and worth is in question. We are left lost and broken. And church, we can see this going on all around us, can't we? People trying to find their value and worth in something other than that relationship with God. Trying to find their identity in what they can do instead of what God has done. That's why the New Testament book of Ephesians is so timely. It was timely 2,000 years ago in a sinful city of Ephesus where people were being deceived by the enemy and bought into these false identities. And it's timely today. Because the truth is of Ephesians, it is all about who we are in Jesus Christ. The truth of Ephesians is it's all about our identity in Him. It's all about our identity in Jesus. Jesus is our value and worth. Jesus is what is greater than our sin, our faults, our weaknesses. Jesus is greater than our successes. He's greater than the things that we allow to determine or dictate or define us. Jesus is greater than all of that, and Jesus is our identity in whatever relationships we are in. All we are is to be found and lived in the identity, the authority, and the victory of Jesus Christ, because that identity that is found in Christ alone never fades. That identity never fails. That identity is eternal. And Paul closes out Ephesians with this reality of this battle for our identity. He closes out Ephesians, more importantly, with God's call and provision to put on the armor of God so that we can stand in who Christ is and what he has done, and we are secure in him and not in ourselves. Well, we're going to spend the next several weeks looking at each piece of that spiritual armor. But today we're going to set the foundation, and again, to see clearly this battle that we are in. The devil wants nothing more than us to trust in ourselves or to trust in mankind, trust in relationships, trust in false securities, false identities. But we need to see clearly who we are, and in that spiritual armor, we need to be able to stand in the identity of Christ. So let's go ahead and see in verses 10 through 13 of Ephesians chapter 6. Let's go ahead and see this battle we are in, and we'll point out two important truths for us today. Verses 10 through 13, this is what Paul wrote. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. The first thing that we need to see in this is that we need to know where our strength comes from. We need to know where our strength comes from. And Paul starts by saying, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Now, what that reveals, first of all, is we are weak. We are not able to stand our ground against the schemes and tactics of the enemy on our own. It is only through the power and strength that God gives us that we can fight this battle for our identity. We cannot try to rely on ourselves or rely on others. We cannot rely on the things of this world. But as Paul reveals, God is our source of strength. He is our source of strength. He is greater and more powerful than the devil and all the evil forces. He is greater. And we must recognize that, first of all, God's strength is greater, but also recognize that we need to submit to that power in our life, which is why Paul made it very clear when he said, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Paul talks about this power in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 19 through 20, when he says this prayer over the believers in Ephesus. He said, I also pray that you will understand the incredible greatness of God's power for us who believe in him. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms. Church, we have the resurrection power in us. And we must understand that we need to submit to that power that brought Jesus from the grave. We need to submit to that power and allow that to be our strength so that we stand against the schemes of the enemy. But again, it has to come from a recognition and a submission to God's power within us. We don't have the power. We don't have the strength. We are weak. This is a spiritual battle. And we need a spiritual power. Reminds me of Psalm 24, verse 8, that says, "Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord invincible in battle." We are in a battle, and we need a God who is invincible in battle. We need a strength beyond ourselves, and that is to know where our strength comes from. The second thing we see in this is we need to then know who our enemy is. We need to then know who our enemy is. And Paul has already mentioned our enemy, the devil, in Ephesians chapter 4, in verse 27, when he said that anger gives a foothold to the devil. Anger gives a foothold to the devil. The devil is our enemy. And that Greek title for the devil, or diabolos, means slanderer. Slanderer. One who makes a false accusation. One who turns us away from God if we let him. He makes a false accusation. He wants us to believe that we have the strength. He wants us to believe that God's at fault. He wants us to believe that we can't trust God or that we can do this on our own. In the Hebrew, Satan means adversary. My favorite description, though, comes from Jesus in John 8, where he says he's the father of lies. That is our enemy. And he wants to steal, kill, and destroy. Just as real as God is, just as real, historically proven that Jesus lived and died, and as Bill said, 500 people saw him when he came back to life. Just as real as Jesus, the victorious king, is our enemy. And he prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. We are in a spiritual battle. We need to know that there is an enemy, and he is real. And see, the enemy is so good at deceiving. He is the father of lies. He is so good at making other things appear to be the enemy when he really is the enemy. He's so good at having us be in conflict with other people. He's so good at having other things appear to be the enemy. Right now, it would be so easy to say that COVID-19 is the enemy. It'd be so easy right now to be able to say that police officers are the enemy, or that African American people are the enemy. The truth is, there is one enemy, and it is the devil. But see how he lies? Now, what those police officers did was wrong, but it would be just as wrong to say that all police officers are wrong. And there are people of all races that are criminals. But just to say a certain race is more of a criminal is wrong. But understand that it's the devil that wants us to believe these lies. He is a slanderer, and he wants all the attention to be on attacking each other. He wants all the attention to be on fear. He wants us to miss God, and he wants us to make something else the enemy. That's what he does. That's what he does. That's what he did in the beginning with Adam and Eve. He tempted Eve to believe that that fruit had something that God hadn't already provided. That God couldn't be trusted. That there was something that God was holding back. And what is he doing now? He's doing the same thing. Verse 11, Paul says that the devil uses schemes and tactics. Schemes and tactics against us. He is so good at, again, making something else the enemy. He is so good at distorting the truth. He is so good at camouflaging evil and making sin appealing. He wants to get a foothold. But I like in verse 12 where Paul describes this battle we're in. And he uses this word struggle. And in the Greek, this word struggle describes a wrestling match. It's not that the devil is far off tossing, bombs of lies and deception. He is close. And see, this word struggle, this wrestling match, represents a close, intense battle filled with manipulation and strategy. And see, it's so easy for the church to be deceived and think, the devil's not in the church. The devil's not here today. He's waiting outside the doors when we leave. No, he is here. He is distracting. He is deceiving. He is putting our focus on other things. He is close, manipulating, strategizing. And to mean he's close means he knows us. He knows our weaknesses. The thing that I tell people is the devil doesn't use same tricks. He doesn't use multiple tricks. He uses the same ones over and over and over and over again. If fear is a stronghold in your life, he's going to continue to use it. Now, he might present it in different ways, but it's the same trick over and over again. If it's lust, it's the same thing. If it's greed, if it's pride, jealousy, whatever it is, he uses the same thing and he disguises it, but it's up close because he knows you. Paul goes on and he says that the devil, there's also rulers and authorities. He makes it clear, again, our battle is not against flesh and blood. And that should be a reminder again. When we get distracted and think something else or someone else is the enemy, no, our battle is not against flesh and blood. This wrestling match is a spiritual battle, which is why we don't fight it in the way we would fight a physical battle. It's spiritual, which is why we rely on God's strength to give us an armor to stand our ground. It is a spiritual armor. And the spiritual armor is to stand our ground against the devil and the rulers and authorities of this dark world. Those are the fallen angels. Those are the demons, the fallen angels that went with the devil. That is who we are fighting against. And we cannot take this battle lightly, but we also must understand, in knowing our enemy, we need to know that they have already been defeated by Jesus on the cross. They have a short leash. They continue to deceive and use those tactics and schemes, but their defeat is imminent. Let's look at what Paul said in Ephesians 1:21. He said, "Now he, Jesus, is far above any ruler or authority or power or leader or anything else." And he goes on to say, not only in this world, but the world to come. Jesus is greater than any ruler or authority in the natural realm, and he's greater than any ruler or authority in the spiritual realm. And then Paul in Colossians 2:14 through 15 reveals the power of Jesus' victory over the cross. In Colossians 2:14 through 15, he said, "Jesus canceled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross." And I love this part. "In this way, he disarmed the spiritual rulers and authorities." He shamed them publicly by his victory over them on the cross. He is describing the spiritual realm here. This is not just limited to the Jewish leaders. He's talking about the demons, those evil forces of darkness. All of those that are serving the devil thought they won when Jesus died on the cross, but they were defeated by his victory over the cross and over the grave. And so we need to understand that the enemy has been defeated by our almighty God and victorious King. We are called to a battle, but we are called to a battle in which we will fight on this earth, But we need to understand that the victory has already been given. And I love this because the truth is that Paul does not urge us to win the battle, does he? He doesn't urge us to win the battle, but he calls us to stand. Stand in the victory of Jesus Christ. The powers of this dark world have been broken, and defeat is coming soon. But we are not called into this battle as if the victory is in question. We are called into a battle in which the victory has been secured. And Paul says that we need to resist him and he will flee. That we need to be able to fight with a confidence. But again, knowing that battle is for our identity. Our battle is for us to stand in the victory of Christ. And what must we do? We must stand. Stand in his strength. Stand knowing the enemy, but in knowing the enemy, we know our God is greater. The only way that we can fight the powers of this dark world is by standing in who we are in Jesus Christ and the victory that is in him alone. Now, some of you have heard this message over and over and over again in your life. Some of you are sitting there and go, yeah, I know this. But let me ask you a question. Does everyone in your family know this? Does everyone around you, those you care about, know this? We see those 9 graduates. And I think about this message of identity. There is such an attack on identity that is going on in our young people today. If we know the truth, if we're standing in victory, how are we helping others to know their identity and to stand in that victory as well? Church, there is a battle. And we need to fight, not only to stand our ground in what Christ has done, but we need to fight for others too. We need to fight for others too.